Welcome to the VandySports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today, Nashville radio legend George Plaster. We will talk about his relaunching of his radio career. We will talk about a lot of Vanderbilt-related topics. I think you will love our show today. This show is presented by The Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water. The Well is a coffee house with the mission to bring clean water to the world. To date, over 30 communities across the globe have access to safe water, health, and hope. You too can make an impact by visiting a Well Coffee House location today. There are 5 locations to serve you in the Nashville area. Those can be found in Brentwood, Green Hills, downtown, Bellevue, and the Cool Springs Lifeway. More information can be found at wellcoffeehouse.org. The Well Coffee House, where coffee changes lives. We also thank our co-presenting sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center, which is located in the Gulch. Our news today, sponsored by Sutherland & Belk, a local injury law firm committed to helping those who've been injured in accidents. If you or someone you know has been in a wreck or other accident, reach out to Sutherland & Belk and see what your rights are. You can find their contact info online at sbinjurylaw.com. Center fielder Pat DeMarco has signed with the Yankees and reliever Jackson Gillis with the Brewers. DeMarco was a draft-eligible sophomore and Gillis a junior. Congratulations to those two. Our guest line, presented by Boll & Branch, started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. I've slept on their sheets for years. They're amazing. I've had no idea how comfortable sheets could be until I got Boll & Branch sheets. They are fair trade certified. That means they've been made under safe conditions by men and women who were treated and paid fairly. You can try them for a month and return them for free, but you're not going to want to. Once you get the sheets, try the mattress. That was voted best mattress of 2018. Go to bollandbranch.com. That's spelled B-O-L-L. Enter the promo code Vandy. Get $50 off your first set of sheets. And don't forget, if you are able, our sponsor, Josh Minton, is setting up some promotional things for Camp Horizon. That is a week-long camp to benefit kids with cancer to learn how to live beyond their treatment. Anyway, if you're interested in sponsorships, there are multiple opportunities. Please give Josh a call. His cell number, 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. We have a very special guest today. He is a first-time guest on this podcast. He is a guy that I've admired for a long time. I grew up listening to his stuff through high school and college and beyond. If you were listening to this podcast, you probably know exactly who he is. He is George Plaster. George is getting back into radio. I will let him tell you about that. But George, welcome to the show. It is a real thrill to have you on today.
Chris, thank you. All I can tell you is you got to have a better standard than that.
Well, for a while you were the standard in this town and the only standard, and you were a guy, and I say this in all sincerity on behalf of a lot of people, there's a ton of us that grew up with you. I used to shoot basketball in the driveway listening to your show and just kind of hanging on every word. You have really, in all sincerity, made a great contribution to the sports landscape in this town, and you have filled so many hours of my life with informative sports talk that I enjoyed, and I'm really happy for you that you are back in the business.
Well, you are really nice to say that. The truth of it is that when people come up and say something like that, that gives you a thrill unlike anything else. Because I remember as a kid listening to Pete Franklin out of 3WE in Cleveland and a young 22-year-old guy named Bob Costas on KMOX radio in St. Louis, and to ever think that anybody would sit around listening to my stuff just blows me away. It really does.
We've only got an hour, and so I've got to be careful of how we manage our time, but what triggered you getting into radio? When was your first day on air?
First day on air, gosh, that would have been in college. I kind of hoodwinked a guy, Paul Lyle, who passed away a couple of years ago. And at the time, Paul was with KDA and KDF, and WKDA was a very small AM signal that was doing some sports, and he needed somebody like me, young, energetic, who would work for $3.40 an hour. And so I got a ton of great experience while I was in college. I came out of school way better prepared in the broadcast world than most kids my age would. That was a big advantage for me. He was a great teacher.
Getting back into radio, of course, you were on the verge of going on air on Monday. We were doing this on a Friday. What triggered you getting back into radio? And so that I don't forget it, I want to give you a chance to promo your show that is coming up.
Chris, first of all, thank you for that. When I went to Belmont, I kind of had reached a point. I had been doing this for 27 years, and I really was getting sick and tired of consultants and people that didn't know anything about the landscape of Nashville, Tennessee, trying to tell me how to do the show. And at the point that happened, that was a signal that I had had enough. And I just didn't want to be told, by consultants, you have to spend X amount of every show talking about the Titans or X amount talking about. I always wanted a show that everything was on the table, and I didn't have to follow some percentage thing. And that's really what it came down to. I don't know, about a year ago, this started happening a lot at Predator games. I'm a season ticket holder, and between periods, I'd go out in the concourse, and more people started asking me, when are you coming back? And the truth of it was, I had no intention of doing this. But the more I kept hearing it, the more I kept starting to ask myself, why aren't you doing this? You love it. It's in your blood. Find the right setting and see if you can do this again. And that's sort of what it came down to.
Well, what I grew up with was what you guys did, which was people just talk sports, and they talked about what was going on. Now, the landscape has changed a lot with pro sports and things from back when you started in the very beginning, but I look at the evolution of sports media, radio included in that, and what you have now is you have a lot of stuff that's not about sports. You turn on sometimes and it's reality TV or these ego-centered shows where the personalities a lot of times think it's about them. You have politics has entered the fray now, where a lot of writers spend a lot of time on that. What has happened to the sports media profession, even since you got out of it?
Yeah, it's been. I'm aware that it's going on. I made a policy for myself that when I went to Belmont, that I was not going to listen to anybody's shows. And so for the last 3 years, I can honestly say I have not heard 30 minutes of sports talk radio in Nashville from anybody, even Willie and Darren, as close as I am to them, other than doing the silly underdog picks with them. I've got 3 rules that I try to go by on getting back in. The first one is we're going to talk sports. I'm not smart enough to get into politics and get into, the Kardashians and all that kind of stuff. We're going to talk sports. The second thing, we're going to have fun. I think that was one of the things that people picked up on, was that those of us that were doing the show were having a blast doing it. And the third thing is that we need to respect our listeners and our callers. It shouldn't be a combat zone the minute they get on the air with us. And I think there's been way too much of that in the sports talk industry. And the truth of it is, listeners can contribute great things if you just give them a chance. From time to time, you'll get somebody that, it isn't what you're looking for. But I've always found, for the most part, in doing that show, listeners and callers for me were great. And I intend for it to be that way this go around. It's WSM AM, 650 on the dial, 3 to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. I know what the stuff is. AM, is a challenge to get people to listen to it. But if they do, they're going to find out that this is one of the 12 strongest AM signals in the country. And come football season, when it gets darker earlier in October, and all of a sudden people in Chicago and St. Louis and Atlanta and Charlotte could hear this show if they want to, that brings a new element that I've never dealt with before, and I'm really excited about that.
George, we open our show up for questions from people on our site, and let me tell you, when I did that, the response was overwhelming. I have pared these questions down, so if you left the question and didn't get answered, it was not intentional. We only have so much time, and I sort of weeded out the duplicate questions into one. So if that's cool, I'm going to go into the mailbag.
Sure.
Our mailbag,
let's do it.
Sure. Our mailbag is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. Do you need an insurance agent who wants to know your unique needs and circumstances and will tailor an insurance plan to fit them? Josh is your guy. Call him at 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Facebook at facebook.com/JD Minton HQ. He's my agent. Give him a shot. I think you'll be pleased. Josh is a great guy and has done a great job for me. Okay, we have questions that just span the globe, from your experience with Vanderbilt to your experience in radio to your opinions of Vanderbilt. I'm going to kind of pop these off in a little bit of an order. I think this is a great starting point. Bighorn Sheep says, a lot of folks don't think you're a Vanderbilt fan because how often you've criticized them over the years. I've said the opposite, as you seem to go to a ton of Vanderbilt sporting events as a fan. I've always thought your criticism comes from being such a strong fan that you want them to be the best. And if you weren't such a fan, you actually wouldn't criticize them as much. Just comment and explain on whether my thoughts are true or false.
I think he's probably hit it as close as anybody has ever come that gave any thought to it. Listen, there's some things over 25 to 30 years that I would probably love to take back. That's one of the things about sports talk radio is you don't have an eraser that allows you to do that. So are there things over the years that I might like to take back? Sure. Did I get frustrated? Absolutely. My frustration, first of all, I care deeply about what goes on there. I went to school there. I grew up rooting for their teams. Have I probably been harder on them because of that? Maybe so. But I'll say this, and I think a lot of people probably won't believe this. I've agonized over a lot of the stances that I've taken when it's come to Vanderbilt. And I'm not saying I'm 100% right on what I've put out there. But I know that at the time that I did it, I probably felt pretty strongly wherever, we may be going with that.
Yeah, and I can identify with that. I did a post-game show for a couple of years. It was a point in time where I had been pretty critical of Vanderbilt, and for good reasons. And I think the difficulty in your position is sometimes the stories of dysfunction and the things that you can't share. So you have the background, but you can't always share the specifics or these specifics. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But I want to ask you, how challenging was it to do your job professionally? Because on one hand, you had the sports talk end of it, and you're supposed to be objective and kind of tell things like they are. And again, the dysfunction that is behind the scenes and the level of it. On the other hand, you're the play-by-play guy for Vanderbilt, so you've got to keep relationships and have them feeling that you're fair to them. That had to be just terribly difficult to manage.
It was virtually impossible, and it really became a little bit of a noose around my neck, where I didn't feel like no matter what stance I took, that I was always going to be wrong. All of a sudden, for the first time in my life, I started making halfway decent money as a sports talk show host. But that then conflicted with a job I had always wanted, which was to be the voice of the Vanderbilt Commodores. And unfortunately, at the time that I got that opportunity in 1995, Vanderbilt sports was in a really bad place. Football was horrible. Offensively, they were one of the worst teams in Division I. Basketball, you just felt like was kind of an NIT program. And, baseball really wasn't getting a lot done. It was just very hard. At the time that the whole thing ended, I think the only thing I would have wished for, and I've told him this since, would have been for Todd Turner to just call me in and say, look, let's level with each other. This is not going to work. And I think I probably would have said, you know what, you're absolutely right. Let's call it a day. Give me 2 season tickets. I'll say nice things. You say nice things, and we'll go our separate ways. And that really was the only thing at the time that bothered me.
Where was your main source of pushback over the years? Was it from the AD? Was it from higher up in the administration? And how bad did it get at times?
You may have to help me with the question. You're saying while I was the announcer?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you got some feedback from Vanderbilt at times. There was some tension there. Where did that come from, I guess, is the big thing. Was the source of it the sitting AD at the time, or was it from other places?
I think it started with the fact that Joe Wyatt really was not aware that I was being hired as the radio announcer. The late John Rich, basically forced the issue. He realized that the sports talk show that I was doing was becoming very popular. Like you said, it was the only game in town, and we were putting huge rating numbers out there. And Joe Wyatt had no idea that I had gotten hired. And I think really, as I look back at it, I was probably dead meat before I ever started. It was a crazy way to operate, but that's the truth about how it happened.
Was Joe Wyatt indifferent to athletics or anti-athletics?
I think it was more anti-athletics. For sure, he was indifferent. I used to make the joke on the air that the only thing he cared about at the football game was that there be a plate there with a cheese dip. And whether that was fair or not, he was one that really frustrated me because I just didn't think he cared one way or the other about any of it. And, he said some things about our show at one point that I thought were really unfair to our listeners, that all the people that listen to that show are stupid. Well, the host may be stupid, but the listeners are not. And I thought that was really unfair when he did that.
Bighorn Sheep asks, did your time at Belmont enlighten you to anything good or bad Vanderbilt was doing that maybe you didn't know before working inside an athletic department in the role that you had there?
It's a great question. I think that maybe I've got a little more tolerance in the marketing and promotions world. I think that's one thing that I may not be as critical as I have been in the past, because now I've lived both sides of this, and I can tell you it's not an easy deal. We got a lot of things going on in this city. The Predators right now being the most popular. I mean, the Titans are having trouble. They're 15 to 20,000 seats empty when the visitor doesn't bring a ton of them. There's just a lot of options here that were not here during a lot of the time that I was critical of Vanderbilt and their marketing. But now there's way more competition, and it's just a different landscape.
I want to circle back to the landscape later, but I want to make sure we get in some specific Vanderbilt questions before it's too late. Dorking wants to know your thoughts on David Williams when he was Vanderbilt's athletic director.
I've got really mixed feelings about him. On one hand, I think he did a lot of really good things at the school. I think he was a mentor to a lot of the young athletes who need a mentor. I think there's several things he did very well. Marketing was not one of them. I think that he thought it was kind of a waste of time. I don't think he ever really understood that you've got to put some dollars behind this kind of stuff. I used to always wonder how David Williams, in his mind, reconciled the Predators and the work they had done in the market and the fan base they attracted. And did he ever say to himself, if we did some of that at Vandy, maybe we would get some of this. But there were a lot of good things that David did. I describe it as kind of a mixed bag. But truthfully, it really pained me when he died the way he did, because here's a man who had worked hard all his life. His family is now expecting to enjoy him in retirement, and he doesn't even get to celebrate a retirement party. And that just really got to me. My thoughts and prayers have been with his family, with Gail, because that's just got to be a horrible situation for them.
Yeah, I had the same thoughts. I always thought that the job had sort of passed David by, and that when you're in that spot where you're not qualified to do what you're doing, it's just more stress on you. That was always kind of what I feared would happen to him. It just was an awful situation all the way around, and just one that broke a lot of people's hearts over there.
Yeah, it's just a sad story the way it ended. I went to his funeral service, and I was really moved by some of the things I saw and heard. I just wish it had played out a different way.
No doubt. I think all of us feel that way for sure. Okay, Papa Hick 4VU asks, do you believe that Vanderbilt is finally buying into being a real player in the Southeastern Conference and NCAA sports landscapes? And have you had a chance to have a lengthy conversation with Malcolm Turner yet? If so, what's your impression?
Let's start with the second part. I had breakfast with Malcolm Turner about 2 weeks before he came down with the decision on Bryce Drew. My first thoughts are I really like Malcolm. He's a very likable person. I think he's spending a lot of time asking a lot of questions of a lot of different people and trying to get sort of the landscape of what he's walked into. I think behind the scenes, they're doing a lot of things right now to try to figure out the priorities of facilities upgrades. There's no doubt that they need huge upgrades in a lot of facilities. This is going to sound ugly, but I think the best thing that's happened for him is getting Nick Zeppos out of the picture. Zeppos was another one that really frustrated me. He came in acting like he was going to be Mr. Athletics, and I couldn't find one shred of evidence that he ever cared. And so I think whoever they bring in, I'm hopeful will, be persuaded to say, hey, look around. There are signs of success here. There's some national titles. There's some things. What they need to understand is that great universities can be great at academics and great at athletics, and that the two can help each other. And I've always felt like they never understood that and never got that concept at all.
It's interesting, your comments on Nick Zeppos, because I always found him very elusive. He was never available for comment when I did radio. I made a very courteous request to have him on that got denied. It just seemed like you would hear people say, oh, he's pro athletics. And it seemed like at times he would say the right things to make people think that. At other times he would say things, I had private conversations, or maybe not private, but things that were said in other venues that made you think he was almost anti-sports. And then we tried to nail him down on it to pin down the discrepancies. He just was nowhere to be found. And to know that Adam Sparks had the same trouble with the Tennessean with him.
Yeah, when he first got the job, Gordon Gee and I had a really good relationship, and Gordon Gee would come on the air a lot, and I think he knew how to use, a talk show to his advantage. And so Nick Zeppos acted like he was going to do the same thing, and so shortly after he became the chancellor, we'd put a call in to have him on, and the secretary was very snotty about it and said the chancellor would not wish to engage in such dialogue. Well, then, lo and behold, the day that they hire James Franklin, he makes this big to-do in front of everybody and says, "How come you never invite me on your show?" Real loud. And I said, "Because we can't get past your secretary." And to my knowledge, I don't believe we ever spoke another word to each other after that.
Yeah, somehow that does not surprise me. I wish him the best, but the interesting thing is going to be, as strange as this sounds, some people have questioned whether Zeppos leaving was a good thing for athletics, and I know that contradicts everything we just said, but I think PR is important to him. I think that he got embarrassed in the papers and sort of had something to prove. And I think that got Malcolm Turner a lot of concessions when he took the job. It's so strange that people have questioned whether Zeppos is leaving is a good thing for athletics now that he got a guy in and he kind of got pinned into a corner and looked bad in the paper. So that's one final interesting and sort of just contradictory, effect of this whole thing.
Well, Chris, let me take the stadium thing, because obviously Adam Sparks spent a lot of last summer writing about the stadium. This was something I just could not understand from afar. All Nick Zeppos had to do was look at Adam Sparks and say, "Listen, we're well aware that this is an issue. We know that we're behind. We're in the process of evaluating exactly where to go with this. And as soon as we have it figured out, we're going to let you know." That's all he had to do. I mean, they employ all these people for public relations, and nobody could figure that out. It's just called common sense. That you don't have to be a Phi Beta Kappa to figure that out. What I just said, that's all he had to say, and yet he came off looking, I thought, stupid.
I have a working theory on that, and I don't know if I'm right or I'm wrong, but my theory is that he said too many contradictory things to too many people depending on what he thought his audience was, and I think that him not saying anything always gave him cover to defend whatever position that he had to defend at the time. And by not saying anything, he couldn't put anything out there in print that would sort of contradict what he had told a certain audience at a time, if that makes sense.
Well, whatever strategy that they all put together, sort of the run and hide thing was not the right thing to do. They had to do better than that. And they didn't. And I thought they ended up looking just really silly.
Yeah, and I think that it sort of, at a time where they're trying to be more public friendly to Nashville, I think that whole thing of just being obtuse, to borrow a word from my favorite drama movie, I think that it just sort of added to that impression that they were trying not to create, that they were kind of over there thumbing their nose at the world.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what I would have done if I had been brought into it. Well, yeah, I do know what I would have done. If I'd been brought into it as a public relations expert, I would have looked at him and just said, "Listen, address it. You don't need to read a prepared statement. Come off looking human and just tell Adam Sparks, look, we know we've got some issues and we know we've got to do better. And we're in the process of trying to figure that out, and know that we're aware of the situation and we're going to work to make it better." That's about all he had to do.
The stuff in the Tennessean between Adam and Joe Rexroad came out, I think, the first week of August last year. So it's now been, 9 or 10 and a half months, 10 months maybe exactly, somewhere in that frame. Do you think he's still the chancellor if that doesn't hit the papers?
I don't really know how to answer that, because when he resigned, I believe he said something about a health issue, and I don't pretend to know what the health issue is. I hope it's nothing serious, because deep down, I want to like him. He seems like a likable person, but I just never really got to know him well enough to know. I don't know how to answer that question, because I don't really know what's behind it.
Let's circle back to the changing climate now. I really sense that it is a new day over there, that Malcolm's serious about getting things done. Like you, I've had a pretty positive impression of him so far. Do you sense that the tide has turned over there?
Chris, I don't know how to answer that. And boy, that sounds like a recording, doesn't it? I haven't been over there. Obviously, until recently, I've been a Belmont athletic department employee. So I don't pretend to really know what's going on over there, but I'll give you just my theories. I think Malcolm Turner walked in and was like, holy cow. The first thing he faced, which he probably had no clue he was going to deal with, was a basketball program that was falling apart. And so he had to go make a tough decision right off the bat. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, that's what he got faced with. And then he started realizing all of the other issues, facilities, fan base, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure it's been a little overwhelming. And my guess is that he's done the right thing to say, I'm going to take this slow, and I'm going to get a lot of feedback. And when it's time to get decisive, I will. And that's where I think they are right now.
This could be a lengthy answer. Raiders 1967 says, if you were the new athletic director, what would your most important goals be?
Ooh. Well, I think, first of all, they might be tied together a little bit. I think the first one would be to figure out what facilities need to be upgraded in the order of importance. What do we have to do today? What do we have to do a year and a half from now, and get them in a chronological order that makes sense. I think the second thing I would do is sit down with the marketing and promotion staff and say, okay, tell me the kind of things you all are doing. Because here's one of the areas that they're not getting anything done. Other than Tim Corbin, they really have not had a lot of coaches in the last few years that get out in this community. Bryce Drew was a complete zero in that area. Kevin didn't do a whole lot of it, but the frustrating part about Kevin, who's a great friend, as most people know to me, is that when Kevin did get out in the public, he was terrific. And I used to tell him that all the time, get out and be seen more, because he's got a funny personality. Derek Mason doesn't do a lot of that. As an athletic director, I would walk in and basically tell these coaches, look, if you want empty seats, then continue to sit in your office and turn it into a cave. But I'm going to assign somebody to get you all out there, to speak to civic clubs, to do all of that kind of stuff, because we have got to sell our product. That's the way I think he would need to operate, and basically put the coaches on notice that sitting in that cave during the off season isn't good enough. They got to get out and sell. They got to get out, not sell literally, but get out and sell their programs. You know, Derek Mason's got something to sell. He's beaten Tennessee 3 years in a row, and there's not another coach who's done that since the 1920s. And, you know, that's what they've got.
We've talked about facilities in passing a couple of times. I have a theory. I was asked about this yesterday on our board, and my answer was basically this. I think that they are in a tough spot with football and basketball, that they have kicked the can down the road for so long that now they get, I guess, exemptions on some ADA compliance and some other things like that, that once they start doing renovations, now they have to fix. That doesn't really add to the fan experience or the marketability of games there. It just fixes potholes, I guess, is a good way to put it. You've got the air conditioning issue in Memorial Gym, which is a big thing. You've got maybe some codes requirements, and I've heard some things, even some rumors about they've got some issues, I think, with the piping and the sewage and stuff like that under the football field that are tough to fix. I don't know the exact details on that, but what I'm getting at is I think that they have a lot of difficulties to where fixing the places they have, I sense that they're in a real tug of war between, do we fix this or would it just be easier to build new facilities, period? Do you think that's a fair way of putting it?
Absolutely. I think I think right now that's why they're having to really take their time and figure out what is what's the right answer. Chris, I know for a fact that there was a plan put together, for instance, excuse me, in 1988 to take the end zone where the scoreboard is and enlarge Dudley Field to 53,000 seats. And the truth of it is they don't need 53,000. They probably need 35 to 40,000 with a lot more amenities than they used to, than they've had. Then there was another deal that they put together, even though they've denied this. You got to help me explain this, but there is that long parking lot that goes all the way up that street where there's a lot of tailgating.
Yeah, the Natchez Trace lot across from the practice field. Yeah, that one?
There was a plan put together to build a new stadium on that huge lot. Now, they have denied that. They denied it on my show one time. I know for a fact that they were doing it and that it existed. What they've got to figure out now is, okay, do you try to refurbish Dudley Field with more amenities, or do you just scrap it, start all over, build a new one, get what you need in it, and perhaps for a year while that's going on, play, over at Nissan Stadium. And that's what they're facing right now.
Okay, I have heard some talk of, I don't know if it's that plan or a different plan coming back. People have asked me if you had to guess, and this is a guess, I think my theory is several years from now, they will probably have a new field over where that parking lot is. They will probably tear down the existing stadium, make it something else, and as you mentioned, play somewhere else in the meantime. But help me connect the dots here. When was that plan that they had that you spoke of?
It's been within the last 5 years.
Okay, that makes sense because I think they were going to do some significant things. I don't know if it was the fallout from the Brandon Vandenberg mess combined with other stuff or what it was, but I really think that about 5 years ago, there were plans to do something, which I think is why they were reluctant to talk about it because it's such a different thing. They've got to raise the money. There's so many steps, but I'm with you. I know that something was planned. I never knew the specifics of what, though. What caused that to just fall off the table?
Oh, I don't pretend to know. I will tell you this. I blame Greg Sankey for a little bit of this, the SEC commissioner, and you're probably sitting there going, what's he got to do with this? Well, I think Sankey should have basically walked into town one day, set up a meeting with Zeppos and just say, look, you're getting a buttload of money from us, and we expect something better out of you than this football stadium. There has to be a minimum requirement in this league, this great league, and you simply are not reaching it. And I expect in the next 3 to 6 months for you to report back to me on what it is you're going to do. Because if you don't, we might move in a different direction.
Yeah, I've heard it is impossible to know what is fact and what is fiction. That there have been some other member schools disgruntled with their lack of progress on anything the last few years and frankly, apparent lack of concern during that time. I do wonder if there was some pressure put on them by the league office or from within the league, maybe after the Sparks and Rex Road articles hit the Tennessee. And that's just speculative, but you have to wonder.
I've got no reason to think that they faced any pressure from there. And for the life of me, I don't understand why they should have.
We're in agreement on that one. Let's shift to some baseball for a minute. Bighorn Sheep says, before Tim Corbin, could you have ever dreamed of what Vanderbilt baseball has become, which is the equivalent of Alabama in football and Kentucky and Duke in basketball?
Yeah, not to this level, certainly. But, I'm old enough to go back to Larry Schmittou and remember the things that he got done in the mid-'70s. And I had always believed that Vanderbilt baseball could be better than what it was. But you've also got to remember at the time, if you went over to McGugin Field, it was basically 2 or 3 aluminum bleachers, and that was about it. Nobody really seemed to care. And when Corbin came in here, it was just a totally different mindset. God, what he's done, he's nothing short of a miracle worker.
One thing that I think might surprise you when you get back on the air, I think there is now a little bit of a market for talking Vanderbilt baseball on local talk radio that did not exist even maybe a year or two ago.
Oh, absolutely. Listen, I think that's success just guarantees that. And look at how many kids he's put into to the major leagues, in the last 5 years. By the way, let me apologize on the front end. Maybe I don't need to go on the air Monday. It sounds like I'm losing my voice, but one of the things that Corbin was able to do, he got the board of trust to allow him to build that complex that he's got. But the stipulation was that he had to go raise the money. And my guess is that they probably said to themselves, nobody can raise that money. Well, what they may have forgotten is that Tim has put probably $500 million of players into the major leagues. If you were to add up, how much each one of these guys' contracts is worth, it's got to be $400 to $500 million. And so he was the one guy that could pull that off. And, he was relentless about it. And, he deserves all the success he's gotten.
Oh, and when Walker Buehler and Dansby Swanson and guys like that get that next contract, that is only an amount that will escalate. Yeah.
He's built up a situation now where I think he's probably doing a lot more selecting than he's having to do recruiting. And I think in particular in pitching, I think there are a bunch of young pitchers out there who are juniors and seniors in high school who are looking at his track record and going, man, I got to go to Vandy because they're doing something right in the pitching world. And all these guys are ending up getting to the majors, and a lot of them are going on and doing very well once they get there. And so I think he's created a deal where these kids are hoping he'll notice them rather than vice versa. Who would have ever thought it?
Oh, I know. It has been crazy. Well, George, if your voice allows, we've got some flashback questions if you feel prepared to take those to your old days. Okay.
Let's do it.
I'm going to start with this one. Boy, this is a doozy. Bighorn Sheep says, can you even begin to explain to folks who've been in Nashville 20 years or less how much attention Vanderbilt got not admitting Ron Mercer to school, thus ending the recruitment, and how long that story was what everyone wanted to talk about?
In the 27 years that I did sports talk radio, it was the single most explosive issue that I ever dealt with. It was just it was just amazing. I can remember about 2 weeks before it got out there, I went over to Buzz Peterson's house. He was an assistant coach at Vandy at the time. And I told him, I said, Buzz, I'm hearing rumors that he wants to come here, but you can't get him in. And, one of the things that probably did not help that was that Paul Houlihan was the athletic director. I don't think that helped that cause at all. But, man, what an explosive topic that turned out to be.
George, do you think if Ron Mercer had been admitted that he would have come?
Yeah, I do. Everything I know about it is that he would have. Chris, the other one that followed right after that, because I was sort of the one that broke this one, was the school about a week and a half later refused to admit R.A. Dickey. And Paul Houlihan and I really got into it over that because he made this big to-do with me about your information is wrong. And I said, Paul, cut the crap. I said, the source of my information is R.A. Dickey. And, we all know how his career advanced, well-spoken, articulate. For the life of me, I have no idea why he wasn't admittable. It was just a bad, bad time in Vanderbilt athletics. And I think the fact that Paul Houlihan was running the ship didn't really help it a lot.
Raiders 1967 says, from your observations as a fan, a former student, former play-by-play announcer, and sports talk host, do you believe Vanderbilt suffered from some less than objective officiating at times against opponents who were supposed to beat Vanderbilt? And his instant replay helped Vanderbilt get more objective officiating. He also wishes you best of luck on your new show.
Hey, tell him thank you. I know the guy that really subscribed to that theory was George McIntyre. And I can remember in a game, because I think I was the sideline announcer, this would have been in the early 80s, where he grabbed an official before the game started and said, look, we can win this game if you all will give us half a chance. And I know he felt like he needed to do that a lot of officiating crews just really didn't pay a lot of attention to him. I don't know if it's true or not. I just know that I saw a coach at that level who absolutely believed that.
Ann Arbor says, tell us your best athletics director story, and you don't need to name names.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll go ahead and name names. When Watson Brown got fired, I was at the forefront of really getting on Houlihan about the way it was done. It was very sneaky. And the truth of it is, I had gone to Watson about 6 weeks earlier, and I had told him that Houlihan was looking at somebody out on the West Coast, but I didn't know who it was. But I knew something was going on. So he fires Watson. He and I have a very angry confrontation in the McGugin Center parking lot about 3 days later. And he ends up telling me, I'll see to it that you never work in this city again. And so now fast forward to the end of the season, and I'm doing their television replays. They had a year where their games were on a TV replay, and I'm up in Cincinnati to see a Reds game. And my dad calls me and he says, Vanderbilt's going to fire you. And I was like, well, no kidding, Dad. I said, tell me something I don't know. I said, why are you telling me this? And he said, well, it's in the paper. And I said, really? So I called a friend of mine who worked in the athletic department who told me that Houlihan had made the statement, it's going to be fun firing him. And so the next day, Houlihan calls me and says, you need to set up a meeting with my secretary. And I basically told him, I said, listen, I said, I'm not wasting the gas money. I'm aware of what you've said, and I don't appreciate it. I don't have any problem if you feel like you need to fire me, but don't get personal about it, or I'll get personal with you. And that's sort of how that kind of thing went down. But God, that's been almost 30 years ago.
How did he get the job with the Sugar Bowl?
Joe Wyatt.
Okay.
Joe Wyatt, I guess he had the pull, and he got him the job.
Mr. Vandy says, what was your favorite game you did when you were calling play-by-play for Vanderbilt?
Wow. Let me think about that one, and let's come back to it.
Okay. Well, here's an easier one. View Superior asks, what was it like to call the 1994 Georgia homecoming game? I think that was the Jermaine Johnson game in Athens.
That was actually a year before I did their games. So the answer is I don't have a clue.
Okay, here's...
I came back in 95.
Okay. Here's a good one. Have you, Peary, asked your favorite Woody Woodenhofer story?
Woody was a guy, I don't know if it's a story so much as it was just, Woody was a guy that you never knew what it was he was going to say. And he would blurt out some things at times that would have you looking at him going, did you really say that? He was a fun guy to deal with. I mean, there was no way you couldn't like him. But on the air, you never quite knew what was going to come out of his mouth. And I think Joe Fisher would tell you the exact same thing because he worked with him longer than I did. I did Woody's first year. But just suffice it to say, you never quite knew what was coming.
Okay, we've got some questions about your career in radio. This is a funny one. HMHS asks if you remember the time you and Joe Biddle were arguing about something. Willie was trying to get a word in, but kept getting cut off. Finally, you hear George say, Willie, where are you going? To which Willie replies, I'm going out to the lobby to call in. Maybe I can finally say something.
Oh, that is priceless. That's funny. I don't remember that one, but man, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, I don't remember hearing that one, but that would have been a classic moment. Let's see. Natchez T. Race wants to know who you'll have on as regulars on your new show, and who were your favorites on the earlier broadcasts?
Well, I'll tell you that Watson Brown will have a big role during football season in this show. He's a great talker. He knows offensive football as well as any human being that you could pick. I can't wait to get involved in the technical stuff with him of what an offensive coordinator is thinking when things are going well, when things aren't going well. Who are the favorite people? Gosh, right at the top of it would be Nick the Stick. The day he died, I basically lost it on the air, and it shocked people because they thought we hated each other. We were always arguing on the air. But the fact of it is, Nick and I were really close friends, and it really hurt to lose him. He was another one. You never knew what was coming out of his mouth. Obviously, Joe and Willie and Darren, are three guys that, I've loved working with over the years, have had a long history with. The General, Al Dorsey, I pinned the nickname on him. He had never spent a day in his life in the military, but for some reason that nickname stuck. I'm sure I'm leaving some people out, but those are some obvious ones.
Star Walker VU wants to know the future for silly underdog picks.
Well, we're definitely going to do it. I'll probably call it something different. And the truth of it is Darren McFarland was nice enough and classy enough to allow me to be a part of their doing it on 102.5. And I'm going to reciprocate. I'm going to ask Darren if their management will allow it to be a part of ours. The funniest thing that I used to get the biggest kick out of, and Willie loved doing it, Willie would come on at the beginning and go, "This is your commissioner speaking." And finally one day I said, "Willie, do you think anybody gives a damn that you're the commissioner?" And he didn't know what to say. But that's, it's probably the most successful thing we've ever done. And it was by far the funniest thing we've ever done, because the banner back and forth amongst all of us, ripping each other, was absolutely hysterical. And I hope we can keep that going when we do it now.
Well, you may not know how to answer this one either. And this comes, I will not reveal his identity, but you know him well and I know him well. C.A. Money,
wow.
And maybe he'll confess that he asked me to ask you to tell us about your first rodeo.
I don't know where that came from. But I used to always use this saying on the air when somebody would challenge me: "This is not my first rodeo." And I don't know where I got it from, but I guess it stuck. When you do one of these for 27 years, certain things stick. Like, I hate to do this, but I got to run. That one stuck. This is not my first rodeo. The thing about using the car phone, everybody's like, "What the hell's a car phone?" I don't know. It's just something, I kept saying it and it stuck. So I'll probably use it on the air now. Joe on a car phone, welcome. But there is no such thing as a car phone.
Especially not after the law they passed last week. So, yeah.
Oh, gosh. You're right about that.
Right. Let's see. Vandy34 wants to know when the last time was that you spoke with John Rock and Roll Smelly.
I'm not sure I know who that is.
Okay, I think he was a local DJ on the FM side. I figured you must have known him if the question was asked. So,
wow.
Let's see. Bighorn Sheep says, "Be honest, if the Vandy boys played the Braves, who would you root for?"
Oh, man. That would be hard. That's a great question. The question that ought to come up on that is, Nashville's been rumored to be a major league expansion team down the road. And how would I feel about that? And I don't know what the answer is to it, because I think everybody knows how much I love the Braves. I don't know how I'd handle it.
Last one, ATL 14 Straight says, "What are the challenges that are unique to local Division I schools as they attempt to market their brands in the region?"
I think right now it's just the level of competition that they've got. They're competing with the Titans and the Predators, and now maybe soccer, just around the corner, and the Sounds and Belmont and Lipscomb and Trevecca. I mean, there's a lot that's out there. I think one of the things that, you have to do when you're marketing is saying, okay, let's take, for example, we're a $10 ticket. Where else can you buy a $10 ticket? I always thought that was one of the things we tried to do at Belmont, was to say, listen, for the price, we are the best product in town. And, I think that's one of the ways you have to try to go about doing that.
Well, George, I hate to do this, but you've got to run. Tell folks again about your show, where they can find it. And also, you have a Twitter account now, much to everyone's surprise. And I'm sure people will want to follow that. So I'll let you give out that handle as well.
Well, Chris, first of all, it's to my surprise as well. 5 weeks ago, I got on there and I found out it's really not that hard, that virtually anybody, even me, can do it. The Twitter handle is George Plaster TN, and I would love for some of you to follow me. I would be very appreciative of that. That's one of the things that's changed in the sports talk world, is that you've kind of got to get on there and do that. And, I really, for a long time, resisted getting in the middle of that. And I'm probably sorry I did, because I've had more fun with it than I thought I would. Put a lot of pictures on there, give a few opinions, root on the Braves a little. Anyway, the show begins Monday on WSM-AM from 3 to 6 p.m., Monday through Friday. And let me apologize before we go any farther for how bad I sound. Hopefully by Monday, I'll have that corrected.
Well, I hope we did not contribute to that, but that was a terrific podcast. It's one I've looked forward to doing for a while. I know people will enjoy hearing it. I will be listening when you hit the airwaves on Monday. George, thank you so much for coming on today, and best of luck on your new show.
Chris, first of all, thank you for having me. I have enjoyed your work for a long time now. You've done a great job. And this podcast, first of all, this has been a lot of fun for me today to talk to you and all these people that put the questions out there. So thank you to everybody. And I look forward to getting this started on Monday. And, any and all of you that care enough to tune in, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Be sure to listen to him on 6:50 a.m., 3 to 6 Central. And anyway, he is George Plaster. I'm Chris Leedy, host of the VandySports Podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with more episodes next week.